Hello everyone, welcome back. Today we are on lesson 21, chapter 21, which is working with the document object model, or the DOM. What we're going to talk about in today's lesson is how the W3C DOM standard makes dynamic pages easier to control. We're going to talk about the basics of the standard DOM objects such as window, document, history, and location. We're going to talk about how to work with DOM nodes, parents, children, and siblings. We're going to talk about how to access and use the properties of DOM nodes. We're going to talk about how to access and use DOM node methods. We're going to talk about how to control element positioning with JavaScript, how to hide and show elements with JavaScript, and how to use JavaScript to add and modify text within a page. So this chapter starts out by going over the document object model again, which we already talked about before. And it is good to note that the DOM is not part of JavaScript or any other programming language, but it's actually an application program interface, an API that's built into your browser. So objects in the DOM have properties that describe the web browser or document, and they have methods, which is built-in code, that enable you to work with parts of the web browser or document. So we're going to learn more about these methods and properties, and we'll practice referencing them and using them throughout this lesson. We've already seen some DOM object notation in some previous lessons, even though if we didn't call it that. And then your book goes into explaining using window objects. So if we look at the top of the browser object hierarchy is the window object. The window object represents a browser window. And you've already used at least one method of the window object, which was alert, which displays a message in an alert box. We've seen that in a previous example. So if we're looking at that hierarchy, the window section of the DOM object hierarchy is at the top, and some of its children underneath are the document, location, history, navigator. And there's an example of that hierarchy in your book in chapter 21. Next, we're going to talk about working with the document object. And just as it sounds, the document object represents a web document. Web documents are displayed within browser windows, so the document object is a child of the window object. There are several properties that you can use to get information about a document, and your book lists them, such as like document URL, document title. You can see document.lastModified, and there's a few other ones. You've probably already seen the document.write method, which prints text as part of the HTML in a document window. So you can use that to write text in a document. And then you can also access browser history with the history object. It's another child property of the window object, and it holds information about locations that have been visited before and after the current one, and it includes methods to go to previous or next locations. And you can use the back and forward methods of the history object to add your own back and forward buttons to a web document. Next, we'll talk about working with the location object. Another child of the window object is the location object. The object stores information about the URL currently located in the browser window. And then later in your book, in chapter 21, it gives you another hierarchy diagram, and it shows you how the DOM represents an HTML document. So if you look at that hierarchy, each of the objects in boxes is called a node, and the lines represent the relationship between the nodes. You should understand that what nodes are, and parents and children and siblings. Nodes is each container or element in a document is called a node in the DOM. Parents and children, as you already learned, an object can have a parent, an object that contains it, and can also have children, objects that it contains. The DOM uses the same terminology as JavaScript in this regard. So the document object is the parent object for the other objects shown, and it does not have a parent itself explicitly listed. Although, as you learned previously, the document object is a child of the window object. The HTML object is a parent of the head and body objects, and the H1 and P objects are children of the body object. So we can work with these DOM nodes. The DOM organizes objects within a web page into a tree-like structure. Each node in the tree can be accessed in JavaScript, and we're going to talk about how we can do that. So there are basic node properties. Previously, we used the style property of nodes to change their style sheet values. But each node also has a number of basic properties that you can examine or set, including the following: node name, node type, node value, and inner HTML. Node also has relationship properties such as first child, last child, child nodes, previous sibling, and next sibling. Remember, like all JavaScript objects and properties, the node properties and functions described here are case sensitive, so be sure you type them exactly as shown. Then it talks about document methods. The document node itself has several methods you might find useful. You've already used one of them in exercises, which was getElementById to refer to DOM objects by their ID properties. The document's node methods include getElementById, getElementByTagName, currentTextNode, createElement. I know this may seem like a lot, but as you go through the examples and use them, you'll start to understand how nodes within the DOM work and how they interact and how relationships between them and how you can use them to call and change things in your browser window. Next, your chapter talks about creating positionable elements or layers. So now you can start thinking about how you can control an element in a web page, such as a paragraph or an image. You can use the DOM to change the position, visibility, and other attributes of an element. You can create a layer or group of HTML objects that can be controlled as a group by using the div container element, which you learned about earlier. Your book goes through an example of how you can control the positioning with JavaScript. You can use JavaScript to hide and show objects. Objects have a visibility style property that specifies whether they are currently visible within the page. And your book then shows you an example on how to actually hide and show two different headings with checkboxes. You can also use JavaScript to modify text on the page. It shows you an example of how you can actually add text to a page rather than just changing existing text. You create a new text node, and then you add this node to the document. You use the appendChild method. The text can be added to any element that can contain text, but in this example, you'll use a paragraph. It then adds the text node defined previously to the paragraph with the identifier paragraph1. And your example in the book shows you the HTML document for a complete example that uses this technique, using a form to allow the user to specify text to add to the page. So coming up next, I'm going to share my screen with you, and I'm going to go over some of these examples so you can actually see the code and see what's happening when the user is interacting with the page. Here's an example of displaying the last modified date of a document. Notice in our script tags, we're using document.write, and we're using document.lastModified. If I save this and load the page, it says this page was last modified on 6/23/20, 8:36 and 48 seconds, which is the current time that I just saved this. This is an example of using a custom go back and go forward buttons. These buttons on the page will allow us to go back and forward in our history. And these buttons are equivalent to the back and forward arrow buttons in our browser's toolbar. So in the div here, we create the two buttons, and on click, we say history.back, and the text there says go back, and the next button says on click equals history.forward, and forward is that method that we talked about, so is back. So if we save this and load the page, now I previously was on eBay, and then I loaded this page, and then I went to Google and then went back. If I click the back button, it will go to eBay, and if I click forward, it will go to Google. Here's how to position elements with JavaScript, making a movable layer. So right here, we're creating a bunch of buttons up top, which is left, right, up, down, hide, show. So these buttons are all in a div with an ID that says buttons. Now the ID that says buttons is just going to align the text in the center, which is why we see it in the center here. And we're also saying all the buttons are going to have this linear gradient background. The text color is going to be white, border radius of 15 pixels, and padding of 10 pixels, which is why they display like this. This square, we have a div, we give an ID of square. It says this square is an absolutely positioned layer that you can move by using buttons above. So this square position is absolute. We're setting where it's at, giving it a black solid border, padding. We're using a linear gradient background, border radius of 10 pixels, and text color of white. So what's going to happen here, if I click left, it will go to the left. If I click right, go to the right. I can click down. I can click up. I can hide it. I can show it. If I reload, it will go back to its original position. So how is this happening? In the buttons, has a on click, and we're setting the position to move to the left. On click, we're setting the position move to the right. On click, it's going to move up. On click, it's going to move down. On click, we're saying hide square. And on click, we're going to say show square. So let's look what we have in our JavaScript. Here we have a function position, which takes in 2 parameters. And this is what moves the square element on the page. Here's a function to hide. And here's the function to show it. Now notice all this JavaScript. What we can do is we can take all this in the center of these script tags, put that in a separate JavaScript file, and then after removing all this, we would then link to our JavaScript file like this, which is how the examples in your book do it. The only reason I'm doing it in here is I can show you real easily on the page so you can look at the code all together while looking at what it displays and renders in the browser. It is best practice to use a separate JavaScript file, which is why I left this here commented out so you can know this is where you link to your JavaScript file and make sure all of this is in a separate file. And that's how you use JavaScript to position and move elements. Let's talk about hiding and showing objects. If you look at our HTML, we have 2 headings up here. This is the first heading, this is the second heading. We're given an ID, here's our paragraph text. We have these form tags. In these form tags, we have our checkbox input. This first input is of type checkbox. The name is checkbox1, and we're saying on click, we're going to call this function show hide. This is the style of the text here. It says show first heading. And we have another checkbox. It says on click show hide. It's going to call that function. The first one is going to show and hide the first heading. The second one is going to show and hide the second heading. So what's happening when we call this function show hide? So you have this function show hide. And what this is doing is this getting the element by the ID. It's going to see if the checkbox is checked, and it's going to set it to either visible or hidden, and you can toggle between them by clicking them. So if I uncheck this, this won't be showed. If I check it, it's showed again. If I uncheck this, second heading won't. And you can uncheck both of them. And your book walks you through this example step by step. Next example is dynamic text in JavaScript, or modifying text. So using the W3C DOM, you can dynamically change the heading at the top of this page. You can enter a new title and click change. So if I say new title for this web page, click change, that's the new title for this web page that displays right here. So how does that happen? Well, this dynamic text in JavaScript, it has an ID that says heading 1. This button that says change here, change, is a type button, and it says on click, we're going to call this function change title. So what happens when this function is called? Change title. Well, new title equals document.changeform.newtitle.value. We're saying heading 1 equals document.getElementById, heading 1. Then heading 1.firstChild.nodeValue equals new title. So it's grabbing this text here, and it's putting that in this ID of this header 1. Next example, adding text to a page. So we can create our own content. Using the W3C DOM, you can dynamically add sentences to this paragraph. Type a sentence and click the add button. So same thing here, we're going to type click add, it adds it there. Click add, it will add the text. So what's happening every time we click this add button? Well, this button that says add that's right here, on click, we're calling a function add text. In this function add text, creating a variable sentence. And we're setting that to document.changeform.sentence.value. So it's grabbing this form in this document. And we're setting a node is document.createTextNode. So we have this empty string plus sentence, which is this. So it's grabbing what's in this input box. Then we're saying document.getElementID paragraph 1, which is this. That append child node. And document.changeform.sentence.value equals this string. So those are the examples from lesson 21, displaying the last modified date, using custom go back and go forward buttons, positioning an element using checkboxes to show or hide headings, dynamically changing the heading, adding text, creating our own content. Okay, well, I hope those examples helped. Try them out on your own. Start, pause, rewind the video, and go through so you can try those examples and follow along. Coming up next, we have lesson 21 PowerPoint presentation, so stay tuned.